Hello and welcome to Devil's Advocate. What are the key lessons to be learned from the horrific incident in Guwahati? That's the issue tonight with CPM Politburo member and one of the great champions of women's rights, Brinda Karat. Mrs. Karat, let's start with the National Commission for Women. They've been roundly criticized for their response to what happened in Guwahati. Would you say that they have mishandled this situation?
I think that would be the way to describe it. It's a mishandling of the situation. It was bad.
I want to go through with you, step by step, the issues raised by the NCW's handling. First, they appointed Alka Lamba, a Congress politician without any acknowledged experience either of women's affairs or of legal matters, to head the inquiry. In your eyes, was that an inappropriate choice?
I don't know about Alka's background and so on. Usually the NCW can involve women's organizations with an inquiry they have. But I think the person they chose didn't have enough experience.
And this particular person, Alka Lamba, then proceeded to identify the victim. She named the victim in public. In your eyes, was that an unfortunate accident that could happen to anyone, or was it a direct result of her inexperience and her lack of domain knowledge?
No, you cannot do that. I mean, it's just totally wrong to name a victim. And then to take the victim out of her home and to take her out into a hotel and spend the night with her in the name of counseling. I think basically it's a complete lack of experience. Perhaps also, you know, cases like this, sometimes one gets so caught up with the media reporting of it that one, you know, you could see yourself in the center of it instead of trying to protect the victim and her rights. I have seen that happening many times.
If the NCW had appointed someone to head the inquiry who had experience of handling such situations, do you believe this sort of unfortunate naming of the victim would have happened?
I can't say that, but I do think in an inquiry like this, it should not be outsourced. An inquiry like this must be and should be done by senior members of the National Commission of Women, who are then accountable, because NCW members have a mandate, they are accountable.
Are these the sort of solutions we need to the problem?
I don't think they're the solutions. The solutions are that anybody who's harassing a woman has to be sent to jail. That's the solution. Whether it's in a pub, whether it's in a bus, whether it's in a public street. And my problem really is that this incident happened in a public space. It was not in a pub. It was on the road that this horrendous incident happened, a couple of kilometers away from the seat of governance in Guwahati. And where were the cops? So I don't think this is the solution at all.
I'll come to the police and I'll come to the law in a moment's time, but let me continue for a while to focus on the National Commission for Women. Many people believe that the NCW's handling of this horrific incident in Guwahati is proof that it is unable to fulfill its mandate to represent women's interests and to defend their rights. Would you agree with that view?
No, I think that's a very, very harsh judgment. And I don't agree with it at all, because we have in these years faced a lot of criticism because we are the people who fought for this. Women's organizations who really fought hard for the NCW. Now people are turning around and saying, so you fought for it and what have you got? So I don't think that's the thing. The thing is, if there is a particular case which has been mishandled, it should be pointed out and they must learn the lessons.
So your view, if I understand correctly, is criticize the NCW when it's mishandled something, be upfront and honest in that criticism, but don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Absolutely, you've got it.
There have been voices that have even called for the scrapping of the NCW. You therefore don't endorse that view at all?
Not at all. Why should they do that? The NCW has an extremely important mandate. Basically it is to look at government policy. The NCW is not a litigating body. It's basically a body which has to be consulted on all policies concerning women by the government, which is not being done.
This instance apart, what is your verdict on the functioning of the NCW, which is now just about 21, 22 years old?
I think the NCW, in the course of its history, has taken some very important initiatives, and I believe the NCW is strengthened when it uses the strength and experience of the women's movement in India. And it is when the NCW distances itself from that and from grassroots level women activists with experience, that's when they really get into trouble. And I hope the present NCW members will re-establish the links with women's organizations and movements instead of being very selective. politically selective in who they choose.
I want to pick up on that last thought. You said that the NCW functions best when it's aware of its connections and its links with grassroots women's movements. Now, I look at the NCW and I see that more often than not, the chairperson and many of the members are actually politicians, not professionals, not women activists. In fact, the present chairperson and the last two before her have all been Congress politicians. Is it wrong for that sort of politician with links to political parties? And I should add in that Purnima Advani was considered to be close to the BJP, although she specifically denies that. But are those political linkages wrong?
No, I don't think that's, at least I don't look at it that way. There's no ban on having a political person as the chairperson of the National Commission of Women, as long as she doesn't put her party's interests before the interests of the commission and its mandate.
Is it possible for her to distinguish between the two?
She has to, and people have done it. I mean, I would say that there have been many instances when very eminent women who are in politics have taken the mandate of the commission forward, and I can't brush everything aside just because of one or two mistakes which have been made, but I do believe the commission has to re-look at its mandate and play a much more proactive role, much more. I'm disappointed with its functioning, there's no doubt about it.
You're disappointed with its functioning?
Absolutely, absolutely. It must be much more proactive.
In other words, it needs to be more assertive about its mandate.
Absolutely.
And it needs to go out there and fight more for women's rights rather than be reactive and responsive.
Right, absolutely.
What about the sort of person that's appointed chairperson and the sort of person that's appointed to the commission? Do we need to relook either at the type of people appointed or at the appointing mechanism?
No, the appointing mechanism has to change. Because we were very clear, and at that time also we said, you must have a broader panel of experts to be able to get the best person to head the commission. And it cannot be just a parking place for people you want to get out of active politics. It should not be that. Or it should not be a position to reward a person. So there is a weakness in the commission's law at present, which does not ensure that the best person gets there.
So should the appointing mechanism be left to the hands of the government of the day, or do you need an independent body separate from the government, on which the government may have a role, but separate from the government?
We have always held that. Women's organizations have always said there must be a separate appointing body.
Let's now come to the law. At the moment, molestation cases like the horrific incident in Guwahati come under section 354 of the Indian Penal Code, but that section actually has to do with what's called outraging the modesty of women, not assault. Secondly, it's a bailable offense. Thirdly, the punishment at the very minimum is just a fine, and at the most it's just about 2 years in jail. Do we need a tougher law, and one that's focused more accurately on assault rather than this rather vague term of outraging the modesty of a woman?
It's not only vague, it's so objectionable. What is this modesty? What about human modesty? What about male modesty? What is modesty? Modesty is akin to saying you have to be a chaste woman, you have to be a quote-unquote modest woman, otherwise, you know, you're going to get what you have to take what comes to you. So the whole approach is wrong, the language is wrong, because it reflects what I would say a wrong mentality. Having said that, we have, women's organizations, drafted a very good law on sexual assault and the different types of sexual assault, including sexual harassment. And now it seems the government has looked at that bill. You know, the main person who drafted it was Kirti Singh, who's a very well-known lawyer.
And your draft also has tougher punishments.
Not only tougher punishments, it has a very clear-cut understanding of what is this modesty business? This is just straight sexual harassment and assault.
Now the truth, as you said, is that the government has begun to look at the proposals and the petitions that have been brought by your group and by several other women's groups, but they've only just about woken up to that now. For 8 years, the UPA government has been petitioned unsuccessfully by women's groups who've been demanding toughening of the law, and there's been no response. And yet, Mr. Chidambaram doesn't miss an opportunity to talk about national security. Do you think his understanding of women's security is somewhat different?
Absolutely. There's no doubt about it. And I think Mr. Chidambaram, on many occasions, has displayed great insensitivity to the different kinds of crime that women face. And I believe that, for example, this whole issue of honor killings and honor crimes, Mr. Chidambaram doesn't seem to think that you need a standalone law for that. And this is across the parliament, there's a consensus on this. But the Home Minister doesn't think so. Why? Perhaps because of vote bank politics, because his so-called Khap Panchayats produce votes where they need them.
You're really saying to me that the Home Minister, who is an eminent lawyer, could have been influenced on this issue of women's security by vote bank politics, and that's why he's been dilatory.
There's no doubt about it. Why is there a delay? Why is there a delay on a law on a crime? What's the reason?
Would you also say that if the UPA, which has now been in power for over 8 years, had acted on the petitions it's received from women's groups earlier and toughened the law earlier, perhaps instances like what happened in Guwahati might not have happened?
Well, I can't really say that, because the law is one thing and implementation is something entirely different. So I won't go so fast to say if they'd done it, there wouldn't be Guwahati, because Guwahati, as you know, has so many dimensions. But yes, I think it is a display of the lack of political will and understanding as to the importance of addressing increasing crime against women, which is absent at present in the government.
Does the UPA government owe Indian women an apology for not having given priority to these concerns and issues?
And an explanation.
An apology as well?
Well, certainly, the government has to express regret as to why it has delayed bringing so many legislations concerning women when it is so quick to bring a whole lot of other legislations which are of no use to the people of India.
Mrs. Karat, let's take a break at that point. When I come back, I want to approach this question of India's response to the Guwahati tragedy in a very different manner. We'll be back in a moment's time. See you after the break. Welcome back to Devil's Advocate and an interview with CPM Politburo member and one of India's great defenders of women's rights, Brinda Karat. Mrs. Karat, let's approach India's response to the horrific Guwahati incident in a slightly different manner. At the moment, 4 of the most important people in the country are women: Pratibha Patil, Sonia Gandhi, Sushma Swaraj, Meera Kumar. But as far as I can tell, not one of them has had anything substantive to say about the trauma that was inflicted upon a young teenage girl in Guwahati. What do you make of that silence?
You'll have to ask them, I don't know.
But are you surprised? Are you?
Not really. I mean, you know, in Parliament when issues are raised, they do speak, so. And Pratibha ji has certainly spoken out for women. I don't know why she didn't speak about Guwahati, but you'll have to ask those women leaders.
But you know, we're talking about the president of the country, the chairperson of the UPA which rules the country, the leader of the opposition, the speaker. Is it not incumbent on them, in terms of the office they hold, that they should have spoken out?
Karan, there's a woman in India raped every 3 minutes. This is the reality. And these are women in positions of power. And they're women who are supposed to be helping to set political agendas. And therefore, I'm not, you know, whether they make a statement on Guwahati or not, you know, I don't know, you'll have to ask them. But my major concern is, where are we going as far as addressing this increasing crime against women? India is not safe for young women today.
And although 4 of the most important people in the country are women and they have enormous power, you're also suggesting, aren't you, that they've done nothing to address this question of crimes against women?
I'm not exactly saying that. What I'm saying is, there is no political agenda which addresses this as a priority. That is what I'm concerned with.
And women being in positions of power makes no difference.
Well, whether it's men or women, who's setting the agenda?
Women in power don't make any difference to the attitude of the government of the day when women suffer.
Look, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is, as a political agenda, it is not on the priority list of the UPA government. That is the truth. And that is how facts speak. All the legislations for women are in cold storage today, or so many of them.
Second, the majority, if not practically all the attackers in Guwahati were in their 20s or early 30s. What does that tell you about young men in India who are considered the future of this country?
Well, fortunately, there are many young men who are appalled and outraged, and who express that outrage. So I'm glad to say it's not all young men, but I tell you, those young men need to have a couple of strong lessons taught to them, and one of them would be to send them to jail, and the other would be social disapproval, if not boycott, in their institutions where they are, in the workplaces where they are. The message has to go that what you have done is totally unacceptable.
Third, the police, who claim that they're not an ATM to respond instantaneously. Now, in your eyes, is that a sad truth, or is it an insensitive and disparaging comment that reveals the police in a very poor light?
The police have acted, I tell you, with criminal negligence. It's a gross dereliction of duty, and we have asked for action against the police. It's absolutely essential.
This comment that I quoted, that we are not an ATM to respond instantaneously, was allegedly said by Jayanto Chaudhary, the Director General of Police, Assam, quoted by the Times of India on the 14th of July. Do you think someone like Mr. Chaudhary should continue as Director General of Police?
But I think he should be sent back to training school to be taught that this is not the way and this is not the mentality that we expect of a DGP of a service which is supposed to be maintaining law and order on the streets of Guwahati.
Finally, the media. There's been a lot of criticism of the fact that rather than come to the rescue of the girl, they either chose to continue to film what was happening or to broadcast it without protecting her identity. Do you share that criticism of the press?
I think we need to get a little more evidence about it because there are conflicting reports. I would say if it's the case that they were just doing it to get a good story and to get a high TRP, well, I think what they are saying that this is what happened, I think it is a shame then that there should be journalists like this who should act in this way.
So if I understand
but I'm not sure whether that is actually the case because I don't know the evidence.
So if I understand your position on the media, you believe we need to know more. There are questions that have been raised. They are worrying questions, but we can't answer them one way or another until we know more.
I think so, yes.
But you're also saying that in the light of those questions, the media needs to think carefully about how it responds in such cases in future.
Absolutely, because it has happened where we've seen a young woman being pulled by the hair by a cop and the media were just filming it and not trying to prevent that happening. So there have been cases where the media have been sort of voyeuristic and also motivated by getting a story which they think would sell.
And that must never happen again.
It should never happen, Karan. It should never happen.
This is Karat. A pleasure talking to you.